Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants from different parts of the world. My name is Leticia Berrisbeitia. I am part of the UN Women Training Center Capacity Development Team, and I'm very glad to welcome you today to this webinar on why is gender-responsive budgeting key to advancing the 2030 Agenda. This is also an informative session on the gender-responsive budgeting trainings by UN Women Training Center. Allow me to begin with a few comments on what we will see today by presenting the session's content map. The presentation will start with a definition of gender-responsive budgeting. It is also known by the acronym GRB. Then, the panelists will explain why is GRB important to achieving gender equality and the Sustainable Development Goals. We will also have the opportunity to go over some principles and criteria on how to do GRB. Finally, we will share with you all the different training options that the UN Women Training Center has available to go deeper into the existing knowledge, skills, and tools for implementing GRB. And also, we will have a space at the end for the panelists to answer some of the audience questions. So before we continue, allow me to briefly outline how to participate in the Q&A session using this platform. You will see in your monitors right now the same panel and the same options that you have at the right side of your screen. In order to make a question, please add it to the available chat box below the question function here. Please note that you can type questions in this box at any time during the presentation. I will be compiling them during the session, and the panelists will respond them at the end. Also note that this webinar is being recorded and that it will be made available through our YouTube channel for easy access once we finish here. So I am also very pleased to present today's panelists, Claudie Bouet and Elizabeth Roberts. Claudie has worked as a gender expert for over 20 years. She specializes in training and supporting gender mainstreaming, including gender-responsive budgeting, mostly in West African countries. A feminist, she has worked alongside many women's organizations, as well as international and national institutions. She's a founding member of Genre en Action, a Francophone research and advocacy network. She has trained parliamentarians and high-level civil servants on GRB in Burundi, Nigeria, and the Gambia, and she also has facilitated many e-learning courses and workshops on the matter. She recently coordinated an action research in Senegal looking at GRB at the communal level in 2 localities. Elizabeth has been working in the UN Women Training Center since its creation in 2011. Currently, she coordinates courses on topics such as CEDAW, gender-responsive budgeting, political participation, and migration. She has experience in social work, research, and training in NGOs, public institutions, and the United Nations, concerning, among others, local development, work insertion, and migration. Well, I will now give the floor to Claudie, who will start on why we should do gender-responsive budgeting, what is it, and how the indicator 5.C.1 of the Sustainable Development Goals and its questionnaire can guide governments on how to do GRB, including how to use some specific tools. Claudie, feel free to start whenever you want.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. So I'm Claudie Bouet, and I apologize for the funny voice, but I seem to have got a very bad cold. So I still hope that you can understand what I'm going to be sharing with you. I'm very happy that we're all together for this webinar. And I think to start with, we need to spend a little bit of time just reminding ourselves, what is GRB? Just to remember that when we talk about GRB, we are asking some very fundamental questions, like, for instance, of course, how is the budget made? Who is participating in the elaboration of the budget? Who actually has, the final word? Who is actually influencing the way that the money is going to be spent, but also the way the money is going to be collected? So how do authorities actually decide on where the money is going to go, to what objective it's going to be allocated, who decides on priorities and on the basis of what. So these are, of course, fundamental questions at many different levels. It's a fundamental question at the level of governance, of course, because it's asking, who is involved in decision making. And of course, we know that in whether it's at the local level or at a national level, the issue of participation is crucial in GRB. And that includes asking, do women actually participate in decision making around GRB? And of course, it's not about saying that only women can decide or can have good ideas about how to spend the money in a gender aware manner, but it's also, of course, a very important aspect of equality, that women do have a say and a space to participate in budget making. GRB is also about, of course, it's about efficiency and effectiveness. And what we have seen is that with the Invest in Women agenda in the 90s, particularly going into the 2000, 2010, the whole issue of Invest in Women has become quite prominent. The argument was that you have to invest in women because it's good for the economy. It contributes to economic growth and development. You cannot develop your country if you underdevelop 50% of your human resources. Of course, it's an important argument, but for GRB, we need to ensure that it's not the only argument that we use, because GRB is also around social justice. It's also about allocating money for gender equity, gender equality, not only to achieve good economic growth and development, not only to increase efficiency and effectiveness, but to reach human rights. And that's really important. And I think that's something that maybe we can discuss during the conversation, how much human rights has to be a center cause really of doing GRB. Of course, it's about governance in the way that GRB, and we've seen that now at local and national level, is also a way of increasing, well, accountability for sure, because most of our governments have made commitments to gender equality. So we need to remind them that, the simple truth is that you have to put your money where your words are, where your mouth is. And if you just talk about gender equality, but you don't actually put together the budget that is going to make it possible, then of course your accountability is largely undermined. And of course, it's about also transparency. And GRB is not, of course, the only way that we can, make budgets more transparent, less corrupt, maybe fight against, some kind of fiscal evasion, but definitely to make efforts to ensure that the way that budgets are made and the ways budgets are spent is actually clearer to everybody is an important way of promoting transparency. So all of these reasons are very important. And of course, depending on who we are, we may put the emphasis more on human rights or more on efficiency or effectiveness. But it's really important that we keep them together because they all really build on one another. Next. GRB is not a new thing. Of course, we've been talking about it more in the last 10 years. But I think we need to remember that feminist economists actually have been advocating for adequate public financing of gender equality for 40, 50 years, probably more. So it is true that the first time that we actually saw clearly GRB being mentioned as part of an international platform is in the Beijing Platform of Action in 1995. And there it made it clear that a gender perspective had to be integrated into budgetary decisions and that we had to provide for adequate financing of of programs. But that was really the result of quite a long fight, in particular by feminist economists. I think we should always remember that. It has gained momentum over the last 10 years, like I was saying, and in particular with the Millennium Development Goals in the early 2000s, the whole issue of financing gender properly was brought forward again. Unfortunately, at the end of the Millennium Development Goals, we all realized that Objective 3, which was the one concerning gender equality, was actually the least financed of them all. With the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation that started in Busan in 2008 and then was again reiterated with the second Global Partnership in 2014, we saw 10 indicators being put forward for effective development, and one of them was on gender equality and women's empowerment. And out of that partnership, and together in parallel with the Millennium Development Goals, there was one indicator called Indicator 8 that was actually aiming to capture the amount of finance that was provided through government to finance gender equality. What was important at the time that it was going in parallel with the promotion of the reform of public finance, and so gender equality was seen both as a way of achieving equality, but also as an important part of the whole package of improving the performance of public financing. Again, the inclusion of gender in the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation was not an easy task, and gender advocates and feminists had to fight very hard to make it happen. There were some very, very tough battles to ensure that gender was on the agenda and not an afterthought. With the Addis Ababa Agenda for Action in 2015, this agenda is combining, it's actually the implementation plan for the social development, the sustainable development goals, the SDGs, and much more so than in the Millennium Development Goals, gender has found more space in the SDG and in the Addis Ababa plan. It's a more transversal issue. Of course, it's got its own objective, but it's also much more mainstreamed in other objectives. And even though we cannot say that they are gender sensitive indicators for all the objectives of the SDG, there are more indicators around gender than there were in the Millennium Development Goals. And what was important in the definition of the Addis Ababa plan was the promotion of a particular indicator 5C1, and we're going to be spending some time talking about it in the next slides. Next, please. Next slide. Sorry, my voice is a bit funny. You cannot hear me, maybe. So the indicator 5C1 is actually not dramatically different from indicator 8, that was, the one monitoring gender equality and particularly GRB as part of the previous plans and the Millennium Development Goals. But it's going further, and it's important because contrary to the MDG, as you know, SDGs actually concern every country in the world. It's not just a developing country issue. And that's really important to remember, because that means that, first of all, that sustainable development, of course, concerns every single country in the world. And as we know, of course, developed countries are, very much also concerned by sustainable development. So it means that, how countries spend money towards gender equality has to be reported, has to be commented upon by every single country. And that's important because, as we often hear, gender equality is definitely not just an issue of developing countries. And even in countries that are so-called developed countries, we can see huge gaps on gender equality, and unfortunately gaps that are in some cases actually growing at the moment rather than reducing. So this new indicator 5C1 actually rests on three major criteria. So far, we have seen that even in the first round of reporting, there are more and more countries actually reporting on that indicator. It has got its flaws, and maybe we can, discuss about it. But what we have seen is that in the first round of monitoring of that indicator in 2014, only 35 countries had reported on that indicator 8 that become then 5C1. But now, in the last round of monitoring in 2016, we found that 81 countries actually reported on how they spend money towards gender equality. So that's really important because it shows more transparency, but it also shows that, there is some relevance for many countries reporting on that indicator. So, of course, for countries that had already embarked on GRB, filling in the indicator is somehow, easier. For those countries that had not started anything on GRB, it means that, the system has to be put into place. And of course that, requires that some kind of, training, and that, some systems, some mechanics has to be put into place. So of course, not all countries are reaching a level of reporting that is, satisfactory. So let's look in more details at the criterion, the three criteria that are relevant to the indicator 5C1. The first one is the one that you have got on your screen now, and it's actually asking countries to reply to the following question: which of the following aspects of public expenditure are reflected in your government programs and its resource allocations? In order to answer that question, there are three sub-questions. One of them is, are there policies or programs of the government designed to address well-identified gender equality goals, including those where gender equality is not the primary objective, but incorporate actions to close gender gaps? The other one is, do these policies and/or programs have adequate resources allocated within the budget sufficient to meet both their general objectives and their gender equality goals? And the third one is, are there procedures in place to ensure that these resources are executed according to the budget? For each of them, there's a yes or a no. You get 1 point if you get to the yes, and you get 0 if you answered no. What's important there is to note that there is a difference that is being made between gender-specific allocations and allocation that is actually mainstreamed in general budgets. It's the same dual the track approach that we can find, for instance, in the Beijing Platform of Action, that is recommending that we mainstream gender in everything we do. In this case, that we mainstream gender in every single budget, whatever its object, but that we also allocate some specific resources towards gender equality. So it's important to recognize that GRB is actually keeping and trying to track those two approaches. It's important because Of course, we keep on saying that GRB is not just about allocating money for gender equality or women, and we can discuss whether there's still a confusion. And as I personally think there is still a confusion between allocating money for gender equality and allocating money to women. But I think we need to make sure that we do not cancel specific funds allocated to gender equality in the name of mainstreaming. I think it's a bit too early to throw the baby with the bathwater, as we say. So it's important that we insist on, really identifying what share of general budgets actually contributes to gender equality, but equally important that we track down what specific allocation is being made towards gender equality, and not specifically to women, but to gender equality, which means that, we would need to, make some distinctions between, the money that's allocated maybe to more practical gender needs as opposed to more strategic or more empowering needs. But again, we can discuss that further. Can you move the next slide, please? All right. The second criteria has actually quite a few sub-questions. It's got 7 sub-questions attached to it. The criteria is, to what extent does your public financial management system promote gender-related or gender-responsive goals? So the first one was really about the budget. This one is really about the systems that are in place to promote either gender-related or gender-responsive goals. And so there are a number of questions that you will, obviously recognize if you're used to working with budgets and also used to working with gender planning. The first one is, does the Ministry of Finance or the Budget Office issue a call circular or any kind of directives, any kind of instructions that provide guidance, specific guidance on gender responsive budget allocations? Because of course it's all very well to ask your ministries or your institutions to track down gender responsive budgets, but you need to provide, of course, instructions as how to do that. And call circulars are a means that is increasingly used in governments to provide instructions. So that would be the first question. Does the call circular actually help and instructs your ministries of your government on how to actually do the gender budgeting? Another one would say that another question is, are there key policies or programs that actually proposed inclusion in the budget that are subjected to ex ante gender impact assessment? What does that mean, ex ante gender impact assessment? Well, I think all that it means is the policy or the program actually based on any kind of diagnosis that clearly shows the gender needs? Is the policy, the potential impact of the policy, actually evaluated with gender in mind? Have there been any scenarios built as to how women and men and gender equality between them might be potentially affected by this new policy or by this new program? And that is, of course, very important, the ex ante part, because what we don't want is that gender equality comes as an afterthought, that the policy or the program is implemented and then we look at it and we say, oh, so that is the way that gender was affected. We actually want to ensure that we check in advance that we really have a clear picture, or at least as clear as possible, to show really how the policy or the program is likely to affect gender equality. And of course, that means also designing policies that have the potential to have the best impact on gender equality. Linked to that, question 3 is around sex disaggregated statistics and data, and that is really the minimum the limit that we can ask of any policy or program is that it is based on well-informed diagnosis, well-informed baselines, and that's really important. And we're not only talking about sex disaggregated data, but also really data that looks at human rights from a gender perspective, and that actually really compares, gender issues between women and men. It's not just a mechanical disaggregation of indicators, between men and women. And it's also looking, of course, at intersectionality, connecting gender with age, connecting gender with class, connecting it with, any other identity that is likely to carry levels of discrimination. Another question that would inform that criteria is around, having clear gender-related objectives. Is it actually clear what the policy or the program that is going to be financed, is it actually clear what kind of objectives it is having for gender? Has it been thought through, or is it left again, to the way it's going to happen? Because of course, if it is not planned in advance, if there's no consciously formulated gender objectives, then it's very likely that there won't be any actions, and therefore there won't be any budgets allocated towards achieving these objectives. There are also questions that relate to the way that the budget is actually tagging spending. As we know, there are some types of budgets that are more likely to adjust themselves to gender equality. For instance, we know that budgets that are built in a result oriented manner are actually easier to get mainstream into them than those budgets that are working in a very functional way with just looking at spending and expenditure, the kind of functional classifiers. They do not give much room to incorporate gender in them. Whereas if we have budgets that follow a more kind of results-based approach, there is more space and more likelihood for gender to be incorporated. Another question linked to that second criteria is connected to ex post analysis, ex post assessment. We've talked in the first one about ex ante. Now we're talking about ex post assessment, and that is, of course, looking at afterwards, once the program has been implemented, it's looking at the impact it has had. Because of course, it's one thing to plan objectives, it's one thing to plan budgets, but the most important thing, of course, is to go back after it has been done to actually check whether it has had the impact that was desired. And that doesn't mean just comparing how many women and how many men, for instance, attended, but it's really looking at to what level the project has managed to change, including the structural conditions for equality. And that's really something that is truly important if we want to look at the sustainability of gender change, if we want to look at the sustainability of GRB to maintain a dynamic of social change. We cannot just be looking at how many women and how many men, or how many boys, how many girls have actually benefited from the money. It goes much beyond that. It means asking, have we actually created the conditions for long-lasting equality? Have we used the money to actually destroy maybe the conditions or the causes that were maintaining inequalities? So we need to go much beyond, who has had access to money. It's really important as well that we check the whole issue of independent audits, because of course, and that's a critic that we can have towards that indicator 5C1, is that governments are very much self-responding. They are assessing their own performance on gender budgeting. But it's really important that we think about the independent eye. Who's got an independent mandate to check whether the money was well spent, whether the right thing was done, whether it was done in the right way, and whether it really truly impacted gender equality. We cannot leave governments to be their own judges, and that's where the role maybe of civil society has to be clearly pushed forward as an important part of gender budgeting. It is not just, and that's my really strong belief, a responsibility of governments to undertake gender responsive budgeting. We cannot leave governments to do it and then also report that they have been doing it. We need to also have civil society strongly committed towards the issue. Could we move to the next slide, please? Okay. Next slide is looking at this third criteria. And that's really very much around transparency. It's looking at whether the allocation for gender equality and women's empowerment is actually made public. Is it actually shared with, of course, civil society, but civil society in a very broad manner. Civil society is also universities, because they might need the money, the knowledge of the money to carry out research. They could use it to pursue research on how public money finances development. Very important, of course, for any person, anybody carrying an electoral mandate. Parliamentarians need to be very clear on gender budgeting. Parliamentarians, including in the opposition parties, need to have a very clear idea of how the money was spent and how it was spent on gender equality. And of course, gender advocates and feminist organizations really need to have that information. And if they don't have that information, well, of course, and that's the challenge for many of us, they need to organize to go and get it. And we know it's not always an easy task. So there, as you can see, there are three key questions. Is the data on gender equality allocations published? If it is published, is it published in an accessible manner? And that is, of course, really important because not everything is accessible on internet. We know about the digital divide for a start, but also the gender digital divide. We know it's not, everybody who has got an easy access to what is on internet. So are there any other way of sharing that information that is not just a digital way? Is there public information? Is there, in publications in local languages? Does it go through on the radio? Is it shared on television? So, all of that has to be discussed. And has it been published in a timely manner? And that's, of course, really important because for gender advocates, if you get the information too late, then, of course, your action to influence the next budgetary cycle is going to be limited. So depending on how countries are going to respond to these questions, they will be classified as fully meeting GRB requirements or approaching the requirements or not meeting the requirements. We will be discussing, I'm sure, in the conversation, what are the limits of the approach. What we have to say before we finish is that indicator 5C1 does not measure, and that would be the main criticism, it does not measure the actual allocation of resources, but it measures the existence of mechanisms to track resource allocation. In the questionnaire that is being forwarded to the countries, there's an optional question that is not scored, but countries can actually report on it. And that is about the percentage of the government budget that is actually allocated for gender equality. And that's, of course, really important because, it's all very well to track, but if there's nothing to track, what's the point of actually having a tracking mechanism? So we also need to know, the percentage of the budget, the volume of the budget that is actually allocated to gender equality. Another weakness of the indicator, and we have mentioned it a little bit earlier on, is that it's actually self-reporting by the government. So there's no evaluation of the quality, the adequacy of the information that is being provided, but also the adequacy or the quality of the resources that are being allocated. So it's progress, but it obviously leaves a lot of questions, unanswered, and that's probably what we're going to be discussing now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudie. Yes, it's Elizabeth speaking. So what I will do now is just presenting the courses we are offering on GRB, and then we will, I see that there are many questions. I suppose that maybe we won't have time to cover everything, but we can continue the conversation by email also. So just for you to know that we offer courses on GRB in 3 modalities in our e-learning campus, the e-learning campus of the UN Women Training Center. The 3 modalities are self-paced, moderated online, and face-to-face. It can be blended also, a little part on online and then a part face-to-face. And we offer the courses in 3 languages, in English, Spanish, and French. We hope that we will be able to deliver in other languages soon, but first we are working on the 3 official languages of UN. So those courses we think can be of interest for all audiences, but particularly for people who work on planning and budgeting at local or national level, from the government, civil society, research, international organization, among others. In fact, it's very good when we have a group with different profiles because it enriches a lot the conversation. So let's go to the self-paced course. Okay, here you have some slides. Sorry, it's in English, but as I said, it's also in Spanish and French. So we offer this course online, and it's really an introduction to GRB. So the course explains the relationship between gender responsive budgeting, gender equality, human rights, human development, and good governance. And there are 4 modules. The first module is about GRB to promote gender equality, development, and human rights. The second module is about the gender perspective in macroeconomics. The third module on GRB in practice, and the fourth on some tools to apply GRB. So we think that this course is particularly useful within an organization. For instance, people from one organization can take this course so that they have a common understanding on GRB. At least it raises awareness within a team or an organization. The length is approximately 3 hours, and it has a cost of $60. You can pay in the campus. There is a way to pay directly with a credit card. Okay, so we can go to the moderated course, Letty. The moderated course is it's the same audience, but it's more advanced.
The length is around 3 months or 11 weeks. And we will have one moderated course from the 3rd of September to the 23rd of November. And we have the three groups languages at the same time, English, Spanish, and French, but of course, every language has its own space. Registrations, in fact, are already open. So the particularity of this course is that participants work on their own project throughout the entire course. Participants can choose the topic they want to work on, the sector, the context, and they will have access to readings, good practices, and the tutor will give them specific indications to allow them to be precise in the improvement of their projects and give them very personalized feedback. So our aim with this course is that by the end of the course, participants will be ready to follow up with their projects and make constructive proposals for its implementation. So it can be to improve a project or to try to design a new one. This is the moderated course. It's now under review, but we are covering all the steps for GRB, from context analysis, policy analysis, budget analysis, monitoring and evaluation, and also GRB strategies, looking at different actors and what could be the entry points to start or to strengthen an initiative of GRB. And finally, we have a face-to-face course. I wouldn't say that there is a difference of level between the moderated and the face-to-face, because we can adapt the face-to-face course to different audiences. So this face-to-face, we will have one in French in Rabat in Morocco from the 2nd to the 6th of July. And then we will have one in English in Istanbul from the 22nd to 26th of October. So it has a cost of $500 and it's a 5-day course. So the difference, of course, with the face-to-face course is that it creates a powerful space for rich exchanges on GRB practices, not only between the facilitators and the participants, but also among participants. So the design of the course is really tailored based on the audience profile, so that practical exercises are relevant to the specific needs of participants as much as possible, of course. And as I said, exchanges between peers allow participants to reflect on their own practices and find innovative solutions to their challenges. So some of the contents of this course are key concepts on and analytical framework on GRB, overview on GRB experiences in different regions, women economic empowerment, policy framework and costing exercises, changing global context and innovation in GRB, understanding the budget and engendering the budget cycle. We look at the revenue side of the budget. Of course, we see GRB tools and we use them. And also we work on GRB strategies at the end of the workshop and how to institutionalize GRB in an organization. And also we have a part on advocacy, what is the role and strategy followed by different actors, government, parliament, CSO, etc. So I will finish here my presentation and I give the floor to Letty so that we have some time to respond or to see your comments.
Elizabeth, thank you so much, and Claudia as well, for walking us through all these points and the training options available for GRB. So yes, just as you were saying, we have received quite a lot of comments, so I would like to thank you so much for your participation and active participation to this webinar. Of course, as Elizabeth says, we have limited time, so maybe not all of the questions will be answered during this session, but please feel free, if there's any doubt pending, to reach us through the email that you will receive at the end of this webinar. So to begin with, the first question is GRB only applied at the national level, or can it be used in a single institution? Is there any mechanism to control the respect of SDG by countries, like the Universal Periodic Review? This question is from Emil Carol Ajomo Ela. So Claudie, I don't know if you can answer it for us.
Well, I think we have mentioned it a little bit in the presentation. Of course, GRB can be applied at any kind of level. Of course, it can be applied at the national level by a government, and that's really looking at public finance management, and particularly looking at GRB as part of the overall reform of public finance that is actually being followed in many countries at the moment, looking at incorporating GRB in new ways, in new aid modalities as well, new ways of implementing development aid, but also ways of using the actual money of the government. Not just looking at how a government spends its money, but also how it collects its revenue. And that's one thing we've not had a chance to talk about, but the whole issue of tax, the whole fiscal aspect of policy is really, really important, because we know that the way that a government collects its money can also have very important gender implications. But GRB can also be applied at the local level, and that's maybe a question that comes later on by other people. There are more and more local authorities in Europe, but also in Africa, in India, in many, many places that are actually looking at how money is used at the local level, at the municipal level. And it's really a level at which I would recommend civil society to work, for instance, because it's a more manageable level. It's one that is actually closer to citizens. It's a level that offers more opportunities for citizens' participation. And of course, and that's the question, can it be used in a single institution? Well, yes, absolutely. Any NGO, any organization, any university can actually, at some point, ask itself the question, how do I use my money? Do I use my money in a way that contributes to gender equality? And there are ways to review the way that the budget is being made, to review, to what targets it is being allocated, to review the way that the money is collected, including in institutions, to review who participates in the allocation, and of course to review the impact that we are having with the budget. So yes, GRB is very much a flexible tool that we can apply, designing and of course adapting tools at the level that we want to use it at. But yes, definitely, it's not just a tool for the national level. It's very much a macro, but also a meso and a more micro level. And any kind of review, like you mentioned here, the Universal Periodic Review, but they are, they're in all of the cycles of work in all of our organizations. There are times when we review things. It's a midterm evaluation, it's the Universal Periodic Review. Any kind of moment where you actually assess what you are doing, how you are doing it, for what purpose you are doing it, with whom you are doing it, that can open an opportunity to incorporate a GRB perspective. Absolutely.
Excellent, Claudie. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, if you have something to add to or any comment regarding this question.
No, I was thinking, GRB is very linked to gender mainstreaming, of course. So there are some tools that we use in gender mainstreaming that we can use also in GRB. For instance, gender markers, that kind of thing, to see if the projects are gender sensitive or neutral. But let's go to the next questions.
No, I think what you are saying, Elizabeth, is actually absolutely critical, because we shouldn't see GRB as yet a new process and something that is, on top of or disconnected from, all the gender mainstreaming efforts that we have developed over the years. GRB is very much a tool of gender mainstreaming. We really need to see gender mainstreaming and GRB working together. It's not a separate issue.
Yes, it's just going further to see really the implementation, no?
Yeah.
So in that, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you both so much. So the second question is, I am working on a research proposal to develop a tool for gender audit, gender budget in a climate of innovation, clean energy, and innovation sector in Kenya. Any advice on the research topic is welcome, or to answer to the question below. Could gender-responsive budgeting affect the freedom with which innovators are meant to work in? At what point can policymakers tell innovators to stop working on an innovation that might propagate inequalities in society? So you were talking at some point, Claudie, about the digital gap and how is it gendered as well. So
well,
I don't know, what can you say to us?
I think that if gender equality is a vision, a political vision, if gender equality is a human rights issue, if gender equality is a pillar of development effectiveness, yes, I think personally that every innovation, every thing, thing in a very broad sense, every policy, every new idea that we come up with, we need to think about whether it's going to help gender equality or not. And I don't think that's making gender equality a dogma or anything. I think it's just recognizing that gender equality is a critical human rights, critical development issues. And what is the good of developing innovations that are going to maintain or worsen gender gaps? Is this development? I think for me that's nearly a philosophical question. It's an ethical question. What is the good of an innovation that is not going to help everybody to, enjoy their human rights or to develop their full potential? So I would say that like for anything, when we are working on innovation, we have to ask ourselves, is that innovation going to serve gender equality, or is it going to worsen gender inequality? And if it is going to worsen gender inequality, is it worth developing that innovation? That's maybe a bit of a radical point of view, but that's my perspective.
Yes, just to add on that, we think that it's very important that women also can be innovators. So I think there is a big work on this, for trying that women enter in non-traditional sectors of work and support entrepreneurships, etc. We don't mean that women necessarily will have an innovative project that benefit to all, but at least we have different types of sensibilities, different people working on innovation. So they may, yes, want to respond to some needs that maybe men don't think about. So that's the point. Also, this is the SDG 9, and yes, I think one important thing is to have a community of innovators that is more diverse also.
Yeah.
Thank you. So continuing with our third question, it is somewhat related to the first one. It says, what are the institutional barriers experienced to this knowledge about GRB? Institutional barriers. How is the inclusion of GRB affected by goals for economic growth? To what extent are Western countries like the UK lagging or leading?
Well, I think the institutional barriers, and there have been quite a lot of evaluations carried out recently in different parts of the world that are coming to fairly similar conclusions as to what those institutional barriers are. I would say that they are not necessarily very different from the institutional barriers that we have known, for a long time in terms of gender mainstreaming. It's resistance to change. It's lack of knowledge, lack of training. It's resistance to pushing gender equality beyond just working on women's practical needs, working beyond access to actually move towards working on control, working on decision making, working on empowerment that is really changing the balance of power between women and men. And of course, there are also some more technical issues, because if we're talking about GRB, we're also talking about the formats of budgeting. We're talking about the way that we are tracking the money. So there are, more kind of technical issues. But what all these evaluations are saying is that if there is a will, there is a way. And there's no reason why technical issues should stop, political will. And that if a country or an institution is really committed to better using its money for gender equality, it will find a way of adjusting, the technical issues. Very often, the technical issues are used as an excuse, we're hiding behind the technical issues because the political will is not really, up to scratch. So institutional barriers are, they are in skills, they are in knowledge, they are in tools, but nothing that cannot be worked on, nothing that cannot be undone, definitely. As for the inclusion of GRB affected by goals for economic growth, well, I think yes. I think if the only way that we understand GRB is, in that kind of invest in women setup, then we may be going for putting money where there is more potential for economic growth, or at least where we think there is more potential for economic growth. So that would be, like for instance, on, microcredit or, enterprises, where we know that in fact there are many, many issues that are not immediately associated with economic growth, but are very much connected with economic growth, like fighting violence against women. I mean, we know how costly it is at a personal level, at an individual level for, the women who are victims of violence, but also at a public level, how costly violence against women is for a country. Yet we may not see that issue, immediately as an economic growth issue. So we need to be careful when we talk about economic growth, not to only channel people towards the productive sector. Gender equality also is very much connected with a lot of social issues. If you do not have an identity, if you do not have property in your name, if you do not have access to information, that will affect your productive potential. So let's not see GRB only as, oh, let's put money in microcredits, or let's put money in women enterprises. There are many other issues that need to be financed and that can really help economic growth. As to Western countries lagging behind or leading, there are incredible experiences of GRB in Latin America, in India, in that particular field, I wouldn't say that Western countries are lagging or leading. The UK has got some really interesting experience, particularly with the Women's Budget Group, which is a very strong group of feminist economists providing, incredible economic analysis of government policy, which, are not necessarily that kind of analysis is not necessarily available in other countries. But then other countries, like in Latin America, like in India, have also thought about, really interesting way of pushing GRB. I think the answer there is that there's no GRB recipe. It really all depends, like gender mainstreaming, on, what is your context, what is your potential, what are your assets, what are the resistances that you are facing. And what we are seeing is that even though there are common elements in different countries, the kind of the strategies that are being put together are very context specific, and that is right that they should be context specific. So there are very good things in Europe, there are very good things in India, there are very interesting things in Africa. I think the rating there is more complex than just saying, lagging or leading.
Just to add, Claudie, I think it's very important, the participation on civil society, as you said. No, for instance, in Bolivia and Mexico, there is a very strong initiative from civil society. So they are monitoring what local governments or national governments are doing. So it's also a way, to track the changes and to ask for accountability. So
Absolutely.
once, there is a little step done by government, the civil society would continue looking at this little step and ask for more. And also, tagging expenses. So expenditure, sorry.
Yeah.
So really, it's very important that the civil society is looking at what's happening and asking for improvements.
That's right, which means that civil society also has to train itself to master the.
In Bolivia, for instance, they have now a platform, and they are so active. They have a report. I don't know if every year or every 2 years.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, the next question is.
Okay. Yes, the next question is also by Alexandra Paling, like the one before. It says, how does GRB include valuing unpaid work in households, so to make visible this production and empower all regardless of employment status? Is this a weak point?
Oh, well, it is the starting point, I would say. I mean, that really is the key issue on which feminist economists have actually built, the whole theory of feminist economists. It's the invisibility of the unpaid work of women and how important it is to recognize that unpaid work, all the care work, because it does impact the economy, it does impact, social, it does impact, everything. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier on, that we cannot put all the GRB money on economic sectors. We need to value and we need to finance the social sector, because that's where all this unpaid work is actually, happening. One tool that is being used in GRB, and I think not enough used, is actually doing time budgets, looking at actually counting, not the money, but counting the time that women and men and girls and boys, etc., spend in unpaid work, giving it some value, but also, looking at how it actually interacts and affects, other roles that we have in society. If you spend a lot of time doing unpaid work, you have less time to do paid work, but you also have less time to do political work, you have less time to do education, etc., etc. It does affect your health, etc., etc. So there is a very, very strong connection between unpaid work and the rest of life, really. And we know that women are very much at the heart of that. So using Budget time is really important. Building satellite accounts, which what countries have done, some countries have done, looking, for instance, at how to adjust public services so that women and men, but we know it's mainly women, so that women, for instance, who are very involved in paid work, can also have access to public services, at times that are suitable to them, etc., etc. How do we make public services like childcare, for instance, suitable for both women who work outside, but also for women who do not have paid work, outside of the home? Doesn't mean that because you don't have paid work outside of the home, you don't need childcare. Um, so yes, it is actually a weak point, and I think it's one that has to be at the heart of GRB. We cannot put just GRB money in an economic growth pattern. We need to recognize that macroeconomic policies do affect unpaid work in a very, very big way. When there is privatization of public services, when there is less public schooling, less public health, less public transport, less public everything, we know that it does have an impact. It does increase the amount of unpaid work, sorry, that women do. So yeah, we definitely have to take it on board.
Yes, and on top of that, in fact, it should be like an indicator or something you look at to value if a program is good for gender equality or not. No, it's the workload for unpaid work. No,
Absolutely, absolutely.
So this is one thing we are looking at as an impact. No, the gender sensitive projects or program should not add workload on the women, in particular for reproductive activities.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well, because at some point we talked a lot about the workload of women, and we also need to make sure that we don't just target with budgets, strategies to reduce the workload of women. Like for instance, we can introduce a lot of technology. We can introduce, many devices, to reduce workload. But reducing the workload, we also need to think about it in terms of sharing between men and men the care work. If you introduce, a time-saving device in agriculture, you may free time, but if you have not actually worked on whether this woman is free to use her own time, you may find, and we have found that in many cases, that she has got less time. She may use less time to do some agricultural work. It doesn't mean that if she has more free time to do other things, that she will be free to use that time in the way that she wishes to. She may still be under the constraint of someone else deciding how she's going to be using her free time. So the whole issue of time is really, really important, because the first freedom really should be, how do I use my time? How do I use my my time to invest it in what I think is the best thing for me, the best thing for my family.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. Yes, we are moving on to the next question, number 5. It says, what kind of position do you need to attain, or what kind of a stakeholder do you have to be to influence gender responsive budgeting? And this is from Nafisa Abdul.
Well, you just have to be you. You just have to want it. I think it's not a matter of position. And of course, if you are already in a particular position, involved in budget making, involved in policy making, you may have an entry point that is more influential. But the experience that we've had recently in Senegal, for instance, where we've done local level GRB in 2 municipalities, we have actually worked with people who are just citizens that want things to change, citizens that want things to change for women. And there are many examples of that nature where, just people got together, they trained themselves, they thought, they reflected, they shared ideas, and they built a strategy to go and, have a look at how the budget is being made, have a look at how the budget is being spent, have a look at what impact the budget is having. They trained themselves, they gained some skills, and what we found in the case of Senegal, for instance, is that at the end of the day, they found that has actually increased their feeling of being a citizen, because they actually understood more, how things are actually happening in their city. So I would say you can be anybody, as long as you want things to change. Yeah, there's no particular kind of stakeholder that is, more important. And the thing is, I think, is the getting together. I think it's the building a collective force that will make the difference.
Elizabeth, do you have something to add to this?
No, I think yes, we see that, many leaders now on GRB topics, they started a little bit, learning by doing, I would say. So they had some, of course, background in, they were feminists, in activists, etc. But they really, went to to speak with the person in charge of finance and try to understand. And so it was, I feel this, from the civil society part, at least, that they really learn by doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
To understand this jargon of finance, which is not easy, but they go and they come back with the good arguments.
Absolutely. But that is another thing, we were talking about.
You don't have to be an economist or
exactly.
a
We were
finance
talking
person.
about institutional resistance earlier on, and the using the jargon, to make things a bit opaque, that's also a way of resisting. So I think if we work together, we will always find people that are, happy to explain things to us, and that we may actually find that, behind all this jargon, there are things that all of us as citizens can understand, because it touches our lives.
Thank you both. So moving on to the next question, it's number 6. It says, in working with Philippines GAT 5% budget, we face lack of understanding at local level about how to actually spend the money, even if a good budget has passed all internal controls and oversight. Examples abound. Courses of hairdressing for women. Is that really empowering? Or ballroom dancing for both women and men so that they learn to interact better? Can panelists give tips on how they would advise improving the understanding on how to apply the budget? More training is not enough. Checklist work or sample templates to be filled in? This question is from Jane Aberhart Hodges.
Yeah,
I have an example, for instance, from Bolivia, Claudie,
Sure,
where,
go ahead.
linked to their national plan for gender equality, they propose some types of programs that you could implement that would contribute to the different objectives of the national plan. So I think that could be a good way. And I was reading the comment from Timor-Leste. I think it's very interesting too. It's like, giving an idea of what could be a good program for gender equality. So I think that could be a way to address that. What do you think, Claudie?
Well, I think, of course, the case of the Philippines is, there are a few countries that have, like the Philippines, actually decided on a certain percentage of the national budget that should go towards gender equality. Not all countries are doing that. That's just a way of doing things, is to say, okay, so many percent goes to gender equality. But then, of course, the question is, to do what? first of all, is 5% enough? Is it too much? What is it based on? I think there's the arbitrary notion of, what is this 5%? Where is this 5% coming from? And I think what it is saying is, where is the diagnosis? Where are we actually, what are we actually using? What arguments are we actually using? What data are we actually using to decide where we need to put that money? Not just how much of that money has to be used, but where that money needs to go. I'm pretty sure that there are studies, analysis, profiles in the Philippines that are showing where the gender gaps are. The gender gaps in terms of health, gender gaps in terms of education, gender gaps in terms of violence, in terms of work, of course, access to work, access to employment. There may be so many gender gaps that are identified. If they are not identified at the local level, then of course I think what it is calling for is more local diagnosis, and maybe not just local diagnosis carried on by external experts, but maybe more participatory local diagnosis where the women and the men of that particular local in that particular locality actually identify what is for them in their daily life, where are the gender gaps that they want to work on. So I think really the kind of the bottom up, the participation in identifying gaps is really critical, particularly at the local level in GRB. I think another, and of course that's what Elizabeth was saying, it does relate to the national policy. Where are the priorities? What are the priorities of the national gender policy, and to what extent can this 5% help to actually reach the national gender policy? I think another way of thinking about this is to think about it in terms of what is actually producing long-lasting, sustainable change in gender relations, particularly in power relations. Is the money, that 5%, is it going mainly to women? Is it going to women's practical needs? Is it going to women's strategic interest? Is it going to women's empowerment? Is it going to challenging, violent masculinity? Because GRB money, of course, can be used with men and with men only, as long as it is, used towards, changing something that will have, a durable impact on gender equality. So I think to actually, the checklist, I think, need to relate to objectives. The checklists need to relate to, what is it that we are trying to achieve? What are the results that we want to see, at the end of spending that 5%? And of course, I think this is where we really need to make a clear difference between, GRB money is not just about spending money on women. It's not just to occupy women. It's to really reduce gender gaps and to change gender relations, to change power relation. So working on violence, working on hegemonic masculinity, working on self-confidence of women. All of that. There are so many issues that could be addressed. I'm pretty sure that if a local diagnosis is done in a participatory manner, with the women that need it most, there shouldn't be any difficulty in, using 5% of the budget in a way that is really going to make a big difference. So I would say really start with diagnosis. And maybe, yes, checklists can help and templates can help, but really start with the issues, start with the context, start with where people are and where they want to go.
Another way around to see it, Claudie, is also to know that there is a battery of indicators, gender-sensitive indicators developed within the SDGs or by ECOSOC. So also, if you understand what is an evaluation from a human rights and gender equality perspective, maybe you understand better what would be a good program for gender equality. No?
I think it very much relates to what kind of change am I aiming for? I mean, indicators are just about change. They are there to mark change. What kind of change are we aiming for?
Mm-hmm.
Work from there, work backwards from there.
Thank you all so much for such a thorough answer. I'm afraid we are running quickly out of time with this interesting discussion. So we have two more questions on the theoretical to go. So Claudia and Elizabeth, maybe you can answer them quickly so we can also answer the two technical questions about the courses. I'm referring to number 7 and 8. The seventh one says, "Hi, Ms. Boucher. Is equity here means as the quality of being fair and impartial or as value of a property ownership?" From Lucrecia Urea. So I believe it would be interesting to clarify a bit the concept of equity. And if you allow me, I'll proceed and read the 8th one as well. Maybe a bit more technical question. We were working with the team on a budget where we had gender-specific activities, while in the same time, these activities may fall under the umbrella of the other activities. Example, first budget lines, latrines constructed in total. Second budget line, latrines for women. How can we work on a gender-sensitive budget avoiding double counting? From Viorica Doros. So I don't know if you can provide any a quick answer to this, Claudia or Elizabeth?
Well, I think for the first one, I think when we are talking about equity, I think we are talking about social justice. I think we are talking about fairness, impartial, yes, but in the way of recognizing inequality. So it's not about, giving 50-50 just because we want to be fair. I mean, giving 50-50 to, in a situation of unfairness, it is not being fair. It's very unfair to be fair to people who are unequal. So equity is really about trying to bridge the gap. So it's equities, and we know sometimes it is giving more to those who have less. That's what equity is about. So I think this is what we are talking about here. We are talking about, equity in terms of responding to needs, but also equity in terms of giving more to those who have less. And that is being fair.
Excellent clarification, Claudie. So maybe we can go directly to the 8th question, or if you have any comment, or Elizabeth.
Oh, Well, I think this is really, I think that goes back to the way that we formulate our work, in the way that we formulate, our frameworks, and all these lines and all these indicators that we are using to monitor programs. I think we just have to be operational. I think we have to be clever and operational. I'm not saying that this was not done in a clever way, but of course you cannot do double counting. So you have to do things as a percentage of, or you have to, it's not about doing double counting. If you have the first line constructed in total and the second budget line, you can work it as a percentage of the total. I mean, this is really, I think this is really it's a technical question, but it really is not a difficult technical question. I think we just need to rethink the way that we, mainstream our activities in a way that the gender specific are, complementary to the more general. We work it out as a percentage, or we disaggregate the data. Of course, we cannot be counting things doubly, but I mean, really, I don't think that's unsurmountable issue. I mean, just now, I don't know. It's yeah.
Maybe
Of course, that
being
won't
more
have to be
people-centered
yeah, you have to
in
do
the
it as a
formulation,
percentage of.
or people-centered in the budget line, no?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, Elizabeth, these two last questions are more on your part of the presentation. The first one says, or the number 9 says, are there any free option sessions for those who may not be able to afford these fees? So maybe it's a good opportunity to discuss some of the free resources and trainings that we have on the Young Women Training Center portal. And are there any certificate at the end? And I believe this refers to the courses that you were sharing with us. And this question is from Emil Carol at Jomo.
Yes. So the GRB courses have a cost. We are sorry, but we have to recover some money to be able to work as a training center. But we have other courses, self-paced courses that are for free. It's the series of I Know Gender courses. So I Know Gender courses, there are 3 first modules that are general, the basics, let's say, on gender. And then you have different topics: gender, gender and violence. Help me, Letty. Gender and violence, gender and work. What other topics do we have on I Know Gender?
Well, the idea is to cover all the topics that are considered important from a young women perspective. So we also have peace and security, we have gender in emergencies, and we have developed a new series of how-to modules, we call them, to support the application of gender in the practical level. And these are mainly on project development in several areas, and also on the using of a tool called gender markers for our projects and institutions. So yes, we have a quite a range of options and also resources as well.
Yes,
in our
and we
resource
have
center.
a course now developed with UNAPS, because those I Know Gender courses that are specific to a topic are developed with sister agencies within UN. So for instance, we have one very good on gender and infrastructure, which I think it's very useful. So, and then yes, we have free resources, and we have also our community of practice for trainers on gender equality. And this is really focused on training on gender equality, but you will find manuals, you will find virtual dialogue that are totally free. In fact, we have one, I think it's September, on masculinities. Is that right, Letty?
Yes, it's going to be on June on masculinity, and on
June.
September we're going to have an SDG related topic.
Okay. And for the certificate, yes, of course. For the self-paced courses, independently if it's free or for a fee, you have a certificate at the end that you can download from the platform. And for the moderated and the face-to-face, if you comply with the requirements that we share at the beginning of the course, you will have, of course, the certificate from UN Women.
Excellent. So to finalize, could you please tell me if a male can participate in this course, which will take place in Turkey the 22nd and 26th?
Of course, we do not discriminate on gender or sex. So anyone, of course, can participate to all our courses. You are more than welcome to our courses. It's good to have diversity in our courses. So the sector you come from or any other identity, as Claudie say, we want diversity in our courses. And hopefully we have male participants in our courses. So that's a good point. More and more.
Excellent. Yes. Also, this is an experience that usually enriches the courses and the discussion, having people from different backgrounds and taking diversity into account when selecting all participants. So I just wanted,
if I may, I think what is interesting with GRB is that because there are a lot of men who are involved in the financial side of planning, and that's very much a gender bias, of course, of planning. With GRB, we have actually attracted a lot of men into gender from the entry point of finance, which is quite interesting, because when we deal with violence or other issues, we find very few men involved in that. But if we deal with money, because men have had the control of money, including in governments, then we find ourselves working more with men. So that's an interesting challenge as well.
Don't be afraid. Men are very welcome in our courses. This is a strong message.
Everyone is. So thank you, Claudie, and thank you, Elizabeth, for this interesting and thorough discussion. I would also like to thank all the participants that are connected for their active participation, their questions, their comments. We remain available. Just a quick reminder that this recording will be shortly uploaded. Shortly afterwards we finish. And please feel free to use it and share it among the people you know and that can benefit from this. So also another quick reminder, if you have any pending questions about our trainings or topics, you can visit us at trainingcenter.unwomen.org or also write us to info.trainingcenter@unwomen.org. So thank you, Claudie. Thank you, Elizabeth.
If I may, just to remind also that in our YouTube channel, we have very interesting recorded webinars on experiences. One of the, I mentioned Bolivia, for instance. I see that there is a question on this. Of course, it is in Spanish, but we have web conferences in French, Spanish, and English on GRB and other topics also.
Excellent. So following us on the YouTube channel is also a way to get the latest news on our resources and courses and all the offers that we have available for free and paid. So, well, thank you so much again, Claudie, Elizabeth, and see you very soon here on the platform.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody.
Bye.